Joseph in Bethlehem, a different Christmas story. Just like me, I am sure you know that part of the Christmas story where Joseph is told there is no room in the inn, and Mary gives birth to Jesus in the stable for animals. In the Advent study in our church, a point was made that gave me a different perspective on Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem. Not holes in the Bible let us look at a story with a limited instead of a wide-angle view of what really happened. There are some questions about Bethlehem and the birth of Christ that are not answered in the Bible. Characters appear and disappear before we can ask them anything. We have been told that the innkeeper had no room for Joseph and Mary, and therefore there was no way for him to welcome them. We know the wise men who followed the star to a house in Bethlehem. What was it like for them to worship a toddler? And Joseph, especially Joseph, do you have questions for him? Did Joseph and Jesus ever play and have fun together as father and son? Did Joseph ever chastise Jesus for doing something wrong? Did Joseph ever look up from his prayers and see Jesus listening? Questions, 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 no answers. For example, whatever happened to the wise men when they returned to their home country? We don't know. We don't know what happened to Joseph. His role in Acts is so critical that we expect to see him in the rest of the story. But with the exception of a short scene with the 12-year-old Jesus in Jerusalem in the temple, he never reappears. Why is that? The rest of his life is left to speculation, and we are left with our questions, and we get no answers. What was he thinking about while Jesus was being born? What was on his mind while Mary was giving birth? He'd done all that he could do, as this is where my up-to-date research differs from the Christmas story that I learned many, many years ago. Are you ready for what I now consider the true Christmas story? Let's briefly go back to when Joseph and Mary left Nazareth to travel by donkey to Bethlehem to be counted in the Roman census. Nazareth is the hometown of Mary and Joseph. Mary is heavy with her baby as the couple travels the difficult 80 miles to Bethlehem, where Jesus will be born in a stable and laid in a manger. That's in Luke 2. Joseph, on the 8th day after Mary gives birth, takes the family to Jerusalem, a trip of 8 miles, so that the Lord can be circumcised according to the law of God. Where did Mary and Joseph live during those 8 days? 40 days after Jesus is born, fulfilling the purification requirement in Leviticus 12, Mary and Joseph travel to Jerusalem's temple to present him before God. His parents make a poor person's offering to the temple of 2 young birds. It is during that visit that a priest named Simeon prophesied about Jesus' mission in life and blessed his parents. That's in Luke 2 also. The family then makes the short trip back to Bethlehem. Oh, wait a minute. Did Joseph and Mary visit Elizabeth, who had given birth to John? It's hard for me to think that Mary and Elizabeth didn't have some time together where Mary had previously visited her cousin. If they met, this would be the first time that Jesus and John were together. In Bethlehem, Joseph and his family are living in a home. That's in Matthew 2:11. The wise men from the east, guided by a star, arrived to worship the King of Kings with Mary in attendance. That's in verse 11. After the wise men leave, Joseph is told in a dream, flee to Egypt, because Herod the Great will issue a command that all male children under 2 years of age and younger are to be put to death. That's in Matthew 2:16. After Herod, an angel tells Joseph it is safe to return to Israel, and they travel back to Bethlehem and then back to Nazareth. That's in Matthew 2, verses 22 and 23. Now, back to the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. When Joseph and Mary arrive in Bethlehem, it is very likely that Joseph and Mary went to the house of one of the relatives of Joseph. It is likely that they were welcome, but told that due to the Roman census, there was no room for them in the guest room in the house. And Luke 2:7 says, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them. The Greek word in Luke 2:7 is the same Greek word used in Luke 22:11, where Jesus said, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? So, it is very likely that Joseph and Mary stayed in the house of one of Joseph's relatives and not elsewhere. Certainly, they had to stay in a sheltered place, and it is highly unlikely they left the house and went to an inn, and then to a stable of the inn. Now listen to the words in one day of the Advent study used in our church. It was written by Ann Robbins, president of Acadia Divinity College and dean of theology in Nova Scotia, Canada. As she said, as we examine the Nativity story, we discover a different picture of the first Christmas than we encounter on Christmas cards. To begin with, the word often translated as in Luke 2:7 is more accurately translated as guest room, and that's in the New International Version. From archaeology, a typical first century house in Palestine would have living quarters, sleeping quarters, including a guest room, and a storeroom with space for animals. Because the guest room was filled in the home of Joseph's relatives, the family may have cleared out space occupied by animals and allowed Mary and Joseph to stay there. God made flesh came into the world, not in a stable of a rustic inn, but in the center of human reality and the struggles of daily life. And this is where Jesus is born, in the middle of chaos, the mess, the laughter, the noise, the complexity, and God is right there. After reading what Ann Robbins wrote, think about this. 1, an inn is not an appropriate place to give birth to a baby. 2, this is true for a teenager like Mary, and a midwife would have been very helpful to her. It's more likely that Joseph found the house of one of his relatives in Bethlehem, for giving birth in the stable of a house would allow the bodily needs of both Mary and the baby Jesus to be taken care of. 5, in those days now in the Middle East, hospitality to visitors among the Jews was essential. For Israelites, it is based on the biblical law in Deuteronomy 10:19, when God told the Israelites to love the stranger. 6. Joseph was a descendant of King David and would have been highly respected. 7. Childbirth was a major event, and women in the house would have helped Mary as she gave birth, and they would take care of the placenta and umbilical cord. A typical home would have had bedding, heated water, all that is required for a peasant's birth. 9. The stable and manger were attached to the house and could conceivably involve the cave. According to history, the men would sit apart and Joseph would be praying and anxiously awaiting the birth of Jesus, knowing that he was God made flesh. It seems to me that the pieces of the nativity story fall into place, and what you have heard may give you a better explanation about the first Christmas. Kenneth Bailey, a Middle East and New Testament scholar, summed up that first Christmas this way. When the shepherds came with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the babe lying in a manger, and on arriving made mildly known what had been announced to them. That's in Luke 2:17, showing that there were many people around at that time. Bailey then says, clearly, the shepherds found the family in perfectly adequate accommodations and not in a dirty and smelly stable. If they found the family in such a stable with a frightened young mother and a desperate father, they would have said, "This is outrageous. Come home with us. Our women will take care of you." The fact that the shepherds walked out without moving the young family means the shepherds felt that they could not offer better hospitality than what they had seen and what had been extended to Joseph and Mary. So where does that leave us? 1. The traditional first Christmas view is that Mary was alone in a dirty stable adjacent to the inn, giving birth alone as there was no one around. The shepherds found Mary with people around, and Mary and Joseph quite content on the birth of Jesus. The birth of Jesus was no different than other Palestinian peasants, and the birth took place in the normal, accepted village style. In such homes, the place for animals is down a raised terrace of the home, and the baby is laid in a manger. In closing, let us be thankful that with our belief in reading the Bible about the birth of Jesus, we can keep the wonderful news on how we honor the birth of Jesus and how we wonder at the news of the birth of Jesus, the Messiah. The story about Joseph is silent when Jesus is growing to the age of 12 and after Jesus is returned home from his teaching in the temple. Let us not be silent about announcing Jesus, the Messiah, to others with whom we come into contact. Next week, the weekly word will focus on what the name Jesus means and other names attributed to him. God bless you and have a good week.